Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back with an episode of Cheap Shots. Cheap Shots is a series that we show you how to save money on the miniatures wargaming hobby, and on today's episode we're going to show you guys how to quickly and more importantly cheaply paint up some Warhammer 40,000 Chaos Cultists, and we're going to do so in the same kind of color scheme that is similar to the box art that the miniatures come in. You could also use this as a dedication to Slaanesh as well, or for the forces for the Cultists of the Abyss, which came out for the Blackstone Fortress for that board game. If you notice, the color schemes are very similar to the Blackstone Fortress Cultists of the Abyss, because I just really like that look on it, and it's a really classic look to use, especially for these newer sculpts that came out from Games Workshop. Now, this is what the end result will look like for your squad of 10. If you follow the techniques and the materials that we suggest using our Cheapskate method, you're going to have the same exact result for about $34.72, getting all your craft paints and materials from Walmart and Hobby Lobby. Now, when you compare this to what you'll need to purchase from Army Painter as well as Citadel and Army Painter is going to cost you $232.30 to make your miniatures look exactly the same way we did. And when you compare that to our Cheapskate method, we're saving you $197.58. So that being said, let's go ahead and show you guys how to quickly and more importantly cheaply paint up some Chaos Cultists for your games of Warhammer 40,000. So the very first thing you do, of course, is to assemble your miniatures. As you can see, I just did a quick assembly for these guys, glued them on 25mm bases. Now, originally these are supposed to be used for games of Warhammer 40,000 or maybe even Kill Team. However, I'll be using this as a basis of a Hellout Chaos Cultist gang that's dedicated to Slaanesh in my Necromunda campaign, Anarchy Road. So that's the reason why I'm going with that kind of pink color scheme. So once you have your miniatures all assembled, next thing you do, of course, is to texture the bases. Now, the texturing I use for my Cheapskate method is just a combination of water, wood glue, as well as sand that I get from my backyard. The first thing I actually do is I look for the cheapest wood glue I can find, and I paint the entirety of the surface of the base with wood glue. From there, I then take some sand that I get from my backyard garden, and I just do a quick dusting on the bases to make it have some texturing. And of course, once that dries, what I then do is I take a combination of wood glue and water and make it into kind of like a slurry. Do about equal parts water, equal parts wood glue. It kind of makes kind of like a milky kind of consistency, and then what I do is I take that water wood glue mixture and I paint it directly all over the bases, texturing kind of like a wash. And what this does is that when this dries, it actually creates an airtight seal for your miniature bases to have that texturing remain on your bases. Now, of course, you could buy a pot of Sterling mud or Astro Granite, which is the texture paints that are made by Games Workshop. Those cost $7.80 a pot, whereas this is just whatever you have lying around, and it doesn't really cost you much of anything. Now, the next step, of course, is a primer followed by a series of base coats. Now, I do apologize, I did forget to take a photo of these miniatures right after I got done priming them. But as you can see in this photo, I use a flat white primer. I just get this from my local Walmart from Rust-Oleum flat white primer. It costs about $3.99 on my local Walmart. And what I do is, of course, I just do it once over with the white primer all over the miniatures. Now, priming actually does a couple of things. The most important thing that primer does is it gives a, microscopically speaking, uneven texture as surface for your acrylic paints to adhere to. If you were to actually take your acrylic paints and paint it directly onto bare plastic, the surface tension of the bare plastic would not be enough to keep the acrylic paint adhered to it. So because that, it would just kind of slough off and ruin the finish on your miniatures. So that's the reason why I use primer for, because it helps the acrylic paint to stay on your miniatures as well. At the same time, your primer also has a really big impact on the vibrancy of the colors that you use on your miniatures as well. Generally speaking, the brighter the primer, the more vibrant your color schemes are. So if you're going for a really colorful color scheme, you want to use like your white primers. If you're looking for something neutral, you go with gray. If you're looking for like a darker color scheme, you want to go with black. That, or if you're doing a bunch of metallics, black also works really well for that too. Now, because I'm doing a quick paint method on this, meaning I'm using an oil wash to actually do the oil to do the washing on these miniatures, it's going to darken down the value of those colors. So that's the reason why I go with the white undercoat, because I'm going to make these miniatures look quite bright, and the reason why is because when you finally put the oil wash, it's going to mute down those colors and bring down those values. Now, once you get your primers done, the next thing you got to do, of course, is work on the flesh. Now, there's a lot of flesh on these miniatures. A lot of these guys are topless. A lot of them have shoulders and chests and arms being exposed, and I wanted to create a variety of skin tones on these guys, so I went with 4 different colors on this one. As you can see, I went for burnt umber for a darker skin tone for some of my miniatures, miniatures, I went with Taupe Gray by Nita's Acrylic. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby or Walmart for about 65 cents. I used it to create like this kind of corpsey, kind of ultra pale flesh tone. I then used Nutmeg Brown by Apple Barrel Paint as well. It cost 50 cents for kind of like a ruddy brown kind of skin tone. And then finally, just for normal, just regular flesh color, I use Flesh by Apple Barrel Paint. It costs 50 cents at local Walmart as well. And I just put 2 thin layers of these different paints for the different skin tones for each of the different miniatures. And then once that dries, we move on to a dry brush. Now the next step, of course, is a dry brush. Dry brushing is kind of important because what it does, it creates the illusion of depth on your miniatures. When you dry brush your miniatures, the pigment of the paint actually adheres to the raised surfaces of the miniature while leaving that darker color in the recessed miniatures as well. This creates the illusion of depth as well as highlighting on your miniatures too. Now if you'll notice, it does give this kind of pastel, kind of chalky appearance to the miniatures as well. Don't freak out about that part because once you do the oil wash will actually smooth out those transitions between the dry brushing as well as the base coating, and that chalky pastel look will disappear as the oil wash actually works on it. So for the miniatures that I did with burnt umber, I dry brushed them in territorial beige. You can get this at Walmart for 50 cents. It's made by Apple Barrel Paint. For the miniatures I did in taupe gray, I did a dry brush of ivory. For the miniatures I did in nutmeg brown, I dry brush in the normal flesh color. And for the ones that I did with the normal flesh colors, I dry brushed those with Delta Serum Coats Peaches and Cream. The Apple Barrel products you can get to Walmart for about 50 cents. The Delta Serum Coat, you can probably get that at your local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents. Just do a really quick dry brushing for the degree of lightness that you want in your miniatures. And once you're done with that, now we move on to the clothing. Now the clothing I focus on these guys next are on their trousers, and I use 3 different colors for this. I use Apple Barrel's Pewter Gray for about 1/3 of them, as well as Light Mocha for another 1/3, and for the remainder I use Skyline by Folk Art. That costs about 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby, while the Apple Barrel paint costs you about 50 cents at your local Walmart. Now the reason why I did that is because one of the things I hate about especially when you batch painting miniatures as well, is the idea of making everyone look the same, especially for like gangs or for Chaos Cultists in this matter. So because I like to add some variety in the color schemes that we use for these miniatures, to make it look like these guys are kind of like threw together whatever they were wearing at the time with some chaos iconography, and then they go out in the field as that. So I want to create this idea that these guys are kind of ragtag and they're not as uniformed as other units are. And that's the reason why I decided to go with this different color scheme for not just the skin, but also for the trousers. And once again, we have the dry brush the fabrics of those trousers. So the ones that we did in gray, we use Folk Art's light gray, costs you 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby or Walmart. For the ones that we did in Skyline, we dry brush those in Anita's Acrylic Slate Blue. And for the ones that we did in Light Mocha, we used Taupe Gray from Anita's Acrylic. Those 2 products cost 65 cents as well. And once again, we're just creating that illusion of depth. It catches nicely on the raised surfaces of the miniatures, especially in the fold of the fabric, while leaving that darker in the recesses, and it looks really awesome as well. So now that we're done with the trousers, let's go and work about the tabards as well as the, I guess you would call them sashes that these characters are wearing. So like I said before, the color scheme we're going with these guys is a combination of both the box art that's presented to us on the box these guys come into. I also wanted to make them look similar to the Cult of the Abyss forces that came with the Warhammer Black Fortress, Warhammer Quest Black Fortress box set. And at the same time, I also use these kind of purple and pink colors because this gang is supposed to be dedicated to Slaanesh. So I use a range of colors on these guys to kind of break up the monotony on them as well. So I used 2 new colors. I used Delta Serum Coat Exotic Bloom as well as Delta Serum Coat Lotus Bloom, cost you 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. I used Deco Arts Magenta, which costs about 65 cents at your local Walmart Hobby Lobby as well. Wild Iris by Apple Barrel Paint, which is a nice dark purple, which costs 50 cents at your local Walmart. And then I used Wisteria by Delta Serum Coat, which also costs 65 cents from your local Hobby Lobby. Now for the sashes and tabards and as well as coats that these guys are wearing, I just picked them out and just kind of broke them up between the different colors for the most part, and then I just put 2 thin coats of this color on their fabric. And I did this to create a variety of different colors and stuff to kind of give the idea that yes, they are a unified fighting force because they use similar color schemes in their clothing, but they're still like individuals for the most part. Now the next thing we're working on, of course, are on the hair as well as on some of the mutations. Now one of these characters does have tentacles coming out of their side, so for those tentacles I use 2 thin coats of bright magenta by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. As for the hair and the ponytails for these miniatures, I use Diva Pink by Apple Barrel Paint. It's a nice bright neon pink, almost kind of like a little My Little Pony type of pink, and I think this looks kind of cool because it kind of, you know, contrasts well with the rest of their clothing. That costs about 50 cents at your local Walmart as well, and I just put 2 thin coats of that on their ponytails. Now the next detail we're going to work on real fast are on their weapons as well as their leather goods. So for the harnesses that these guys are wearing, they have a lot of harnesses that crisscross their chests as well as around their waist. They also have really cool looking like leather boots as well. Now for those, I picked out half the squad in Burnt Umber by Apple Barrel Paint as well as the other half in Pavement Paint by Apple Barrel as well. Now I should also mention I also paint the entirety of their pistols with this pavement paint as well to make the weapon casings kind of a blackish color. Now pavement is actually extremely dark gray. It's not exactly all black, but the nice thing about pavement is that pavement does have a nice little texturing to it, so when you do dry brushing, it does a really awesome job in the finish on that one. So as you can see, I just picked out all their harnesses, their boots, and their weapon casings in 2 thin layers of Burnt Umber and or pavement paint, and then from there we're ready to move on to our dry brush. Now the next step of course was a dry brush, and I did this for all the parts I just did in Burnt Umber as well as for the leather goods as well as the weapon casings. The reason why is because Drizzle Gray by Delta Center Coat cost 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. I want to give the idea that these guys were out in the wastelands and their clothing and their boots and stuff got really dirty. Same thing with their cloaks. As you'll notice, the entirety of the miniatures, the tabards they're wearing, the sashes, their boots, their trousers, their guns, I just did that real quick with Drizzle Gray to create that illusion of depth, to make it look like these guys are walking around in like ashy wastelands and blasted war zones and contaminated urban environments to give them that really dusty look. And then once of course you're done with the Delta Serum Coat on that one, the next thing we do now is start working on the finer details. Alright, so let's talk about some of the finer details on these guys. So one of the things I started working on, of course, were all the weapon wraps around the wrists, as well as the scrap piece of fabric these guys are wearing as well. At the same time, things like, for those kind of things, I just kind of picked those out, 2 thin layers of Tuscan Teal by Apple Barrel Paint. That teal color actually quite contrasts nicely with the purples and pinks that these guys are wearing, so it looks really awesome at the same time. Now, for the horns of the helmets of some of these guys, I also picked out 2 thin layers of Khaki Paint by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart. That costs about 50 cents at your local Walmart. Just picked out those horns and 2 thin layers of that stuff to make it look really awesome as well. And the last thing I did, of course, was pick out the pontoons on the boots on some of these guys. So some of these guys are wearing these interesting looking pontoons around their ankles as well as around their boots and things. So for that, I picked out 2 thin layers of Moccasin Brown by Anita's Acrylic. I just looked for those pontoons, picked those out 2 thin layers, and then we're moving on to our next details. Now the next detail I picked on these guys are the Frag Grenades. So a lot of these miniatures have Frag Grenades on their hips, so because I used 2 thin layers of Holly Branch, I picked that out, just a nice bright Christmas green, and it looks very cool because it contrasts nicely with the rest of the colors we use on these guys. At the same time, I also picked out some tubes. A lot of these guys have like tubes and hoses running across their bodies, so because I picked out 2 thin layers of Kiwi Paint. Kiwi Paint is kind of like a bright green, almost like a day glow kind of yellow color, kind of like a neon yellow, and it looks really cool, especially when you put on the tubing to make this kind of contaminated, poisonous look going on for the miniatures. And one of the last details that we do on these characters before we move on to the italics is to dry brush the Frag Grenades around these guys' hips. I use Lime Shimmer by Apple Barrel Paint. It's how to pick up the checkered pattern that's on the Frag Grenades that are attached to them, just add a little bit more detail as well as depth to these miniatures as well. So now that we're done with the dry brushing for the Apple Barrel Paint for the Lime Sherbet, next thing you do now is start working on all the metallic elements. Alright, so the next step was to work on the metallic elements on these miniatures as well, and there's actually quite a bit on these guys. So for example, on the weapons that their guys are carrying as well, some of these guys are wearing armor panels and things, the blades of their weapons, the spikes of their clubs, the barrels of their guns. I picked out 2 thin layers of Gunmetal Gray by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 75 cents. Now some of the other things that we did, of course, were some of the gold elements, so things like face plates and helmets. We also did some parts of the body armor, parts of the guns as well to add some detail. I used Emperor's Gold by Deco Art. It's a nice, vibrant kind of dark gold color, and it looks really nice, especially when you put 2 thin layers of this stuff on top of that as well. Now at the same time, for all the crack grenades, these are weapons or another type of weapon that are attached to these guys' hips. I picked those out 2 thin layers of copper by Folk Art. Same things like bullet casings, the heft of their clubs and stuff like that, the hilts of their weapons, for example. Whatever details I wanted to be copper, I picked out 2 thin layers of that color. I also did a couple of armor panels too to add some variety to this unit. And the last color I used, of course, was Anita's metallic paint. I used aged copper, and the reason why, aged bronze, and the reason why is to create that bronzy look to kind of add some diversity to these miniatures as well. So you see like one of the fighters, for example, in the front row, he's got a copper colored faceplate, kind of like a bronze faceplate for his mask. Same thing with the guy on the left hand side. I did exactly the same thing for him, and that's just to create some more diversity of the colors for these guys. Like for example, I do want to make it look like these guys are uniform in the sense that they belong to the same group because they have similar colors and similar ways of doing things to make them kind of uniformed. But at the same time, though, every fighter is unique, they're different, and the no two fighters are exactly the same. And that's what I really like about the way that I did this paint job for the metallics. Alright, so now that we're done with all of that, the next thing to do now is an oil wash. Now for our oil wash on this one, we use Poly Shades Mission Oak color for mid-wax Poly Shades. And the reason why we do this is because the oil washing does a couple of things. The first thing that the oil washing does, it just smooths out the transitions between our dry brushes as well as our base coats. As you can see, that chalky appearance that we had before, that pastel look is now completely gone because those transitions have been smoothed out by the oil wash. Another thing the oil wash also does too, it also darkens the vibrancy of our colors as well. So if you notice, the value in the colors of this is not as bright as it was. It was very cartoony and technicolor before the oil wash, but that oil wash actually darkens down the value of those paints and actually makes it look more of a realistic, kind of like a mid-tone look to it. And that's the reason why I use such bright colors in the beginning, because I know exactly how it's going to darken it down. And perhaps the most important thing that the oil wash actually does, it actually brings out all those details. As you can see, that dark oil wash is crept into the recesses of these miniatures, creating that illusion of depth. So now because of that, we have the darker oil wash coming out in the textures and the folds of the fabric, the musculature, the dings on the weapons and the armor panel. It looks really, really amazing as well. Now, mid-wax Poly Shades is a combination of both a wood stain as well as a polyurethane. So after you wash your miniatures with this, you will need to set them off to the side and allow them to dry. It's going to take you about 24 hours for this stuff to dry and cure because of the polyurethane inside. And once you do this, of course, what it's going to do is going to create a corrective coating outside of your miniatures, but it's going to create this kind of like nice shiny sheen on it, and I don't really care for that part. So I am going to matte varnish these guys to bring down the vibrancy of that sheen. Now, of course, if you do like that candy coated look to your miniatures, you'd of course skip this next step. So for this step, it's completely optional. I take matte varnish and I spray my miniatures down with a matte varnish to kind of bring down that sheen on the miniatures so that you can really see the details. I get this stuff, I use Krylon matte varnish. You can get this at your local Walmart for about $3, $3.99, $4 for a can. And I just do once quick over with the varnish spray to bring down them, to mute down the vibrancy of that sheen, so that way you can see the fine details on these guys as well. They look more matte. And as you can see, that oil wash did a beautiful job making these guys look really awesome as well. Now that we're done with the miniatures themselves, the next thing to do now is start working on the bases. So for the bases on this one, I'm kind of going with this ash waste kind of base look for these guys because I'm using these guys from Necromunda. All I do is I just put a single level layer of pigment paint on top of the bases. Now you might be thinking, well, Commander Cheapskate, won't some of the white undercoat actually show through the pigment paint? And the answer is yes, it will. But that is perfectly fine though, because we'll be dry brushing these bases with lighter shades of gray. So even if there is any white undercoat showing through, it's perfectly fine because it's going to look like it's part of the dry brushing. So once you do your one thin layer of pigment paint, the next thing we do now is a dry brush. So once again, I'm using pewter gray to do the initial dry brushing on these miniatures. As you can see, that pewter gray is catching upon the raised surfaces of the texturing, while I leave that pigment paint directly into the recesses. So you can see it looks kind of ashy and kind of a dirty wasteland at this point. And then I do another dry brush real quick with some pale gray by folk art, and that's really to bring out the additional highlights. So now we have those mid-tones of grays, the base color of black with that pigment color, and then this nice kind of ashen, kind of burnt out wasteland look with the light gray on top of it. And just like that, it looks absolutely amazing. And once again, we're just going to run the bases with 2 thin coats of Skyline by Folk Art. I use this stuff for all the miniatures I use for my Warhammer 40,000, I apologize, for my Necromunda miniatures. It's kind of like this kind of urban kind of look, and it also contrasts quite nicely with not only the base, but also the fighters who are standing upon the bases as well. And just like that, these miniatures are pretty much done. So once again, here is another look at the end result as well. As you can see, these miniatures are brought up to a beautiful tabletop standard, and they're ready to bring honor and glory for their Chaos Gods on the battlefields of either Warhammer 40,000, Kill Team, or in my case, Necromunda. So now that we're done showing you exactly how we went about painting these miniatures, let's go ahead and talk about the materials that you'll need to purchase from both Games Workshop as well as Army Painter if you want to achieve the exact same result, except using their more expensive products. So let's go ahead and talk about that next. So if you want to achieve the exact same result we did, but you wanted to use Citadel as well as Army Painter to do so, this is what you'll need to have. And this is assuming, of course, that you're purchasing everything for the very first time. First of all, you'll need to buy a can of Korax White Spray. It's going to cost you $17, followed by Emperor's Children, Thunderhawk Blue, Baneblade Brown, Nagaroth Knight, Longbeard Gray, Caliban Green, Screamer Pink, Cyberite Green. All those are going to cost you $4.55 a pot. Then you're also going to buy a pot of Wildwood. It's going to cost you $7.80 for that, as well as a pot of Bugman's Glow, Cadian Flesh Tone, Morghast Brown, Balor Brown, Moot Green, Slanesh Gray, Eshin Gray, Pink Horror, Demonite Hide, Flame One Flesh, Ulthuan Gray, Emperor's Children, and all those pots cost $4.55 as well. Now from there you'll need to buy a pot of Doomfire Magenta for $7.80, and then you need to purchase some more Fenrisian Gray for $4.55, XV88, Rakarth Flesh, all those cost $4.55 for that. Now for your metallic colors, you'll need to use Brass Scorpion, Leadbelcher, Screaming Bell, and Retributor Armor, all those cost $4.80. You also need to buy a pot of Rust Gray and Ulthuan Gray for $4.55 for that. Now if you want to do the quick paint method, you'll need to buy a can of Army Painter Strong Tone, which costs you $32 from Army Painter. And if you want to do a quick spray varnish, you'll need to buy a can of Munitorium Varnish from Games Workshop, which will cost you $19.50 for that. And then finally, if you wanted to texture your bases, you'll need to buy a pot of Astrogranite, which costs you $7.80 for that product. Now, assuming that you're purchasing everything for the very first time from Army Painter as well as Games Workshop, you're talking about a grand total investment of $232.30 to paint up your miniatures to be exactly the same way we did in this channel as well. Now, we're assuming, of course, for the Cheapskate method, assuming you're purchasing everything for the very first time from our list, you're talking about a grand total investment of $34.72, which means that the paints and materials that we use to paint these guys cost less than the actual box set of miniatures. Because let's face it, if you're spending more money on paints and things rather than you did on the miniatures, you're probably doing something wrong, and it shouldn't really be that way. Now, assuming that, of course, you're doing our Cheapskate method, when you take our Cheapskate method of $34.72 and you subtract it from the Games Workshop and Army Painter cost of $232.30, you're talking about a grand total difference in savings of $197.58. That's almost $200 that you can use for miniatures or for starting box sets or rule books or whatever you want, or don't even spend it all. Just save it and just keep it around for a rainy day. It's pretty much up to you how you want to do it. So as you can see there, you guys, that's how you go about painting up your guys' Chaos Cultists both cheaply and quickly for only $34.72. So that's good for those of you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this, you guys. We'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.